Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I am the manager of visitor experience at the Trolley Museum. Thank you guys for joining us today. Welcome back to many of you who have joined us before for previous programs. If you're new here, I would love to know how you heard about us and where you're watching from today. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics and stories of the trolley era that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And we're going to keep these up as long as we have presenters. So if you have a presentation that you would like to share, please reach out. Anything about the trolley era, Pennsylvania transit, cities where our museum streetcars come from, all of those would be good. And if you have a program that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, please reach out anyway. Special thanks to Bob. This is his third presentation with us. He'll be doing at least one more. So we're super appreciative when people reach out to us because it's very helpful. There's going to be a full list of upcoming presentations as we get them scheduled on the Pennsylvania Trolley website at Pennsylvania Trolley Museum website at patrolley.org, which I'll share in the chat in just a couple minutes. I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program. Really appreciate your support of this program and the museum. It helps keep us going here, and can't thank you enough. Okay, a brief introduction to the museum. We were established in 1954 as the Art and Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. And we opened to visitors a few years later in 1963. We're located along the former interurban between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. We've got over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars now. About 20 of them operate, about a dozen are in regular service. And last year we had over 48,000 visitors. So we are hoping to beat that this year, but that was an awesome number, especially with our new building. Okay, a quick slide of updates here because we do have some pretty exciting things coming up at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. Washington County Fair is a big reunion week. We love to see all of our volunteers from far away who come in town for this. And occasionally we get over 8,000 people riding our trolleys that week, which is a lot of fun because we become a little transit system, or like a big transit system. Sometimes we carry over 2,000 people in the span of 4 hours. So 2,000 out and then 2,000 back. It's very exciting. So come check that out if you want to see lots of trolleys moving at once. August 17th, we're going to have another program afternoon with an artist, J. Craig Thorpe, who has done a Trolleyology before. He is an artist and he has done all of our artist conceptual paintings, renderings for our new building and lots of other projects at the museum. That's his picture. The second one down below, he is going to talk a little bit about how art, how clients use art. So Scott Becker, our retired executive director, is also going to speak a little bit about the client's perspective, how we, the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, have worked with Craig to create these images. It's going to be great. August 23rd is our Canine Friendly Day. So if you're local and you want to bring your pup out to the museum, Dog Days of Summer is the day to do that. We'll have little water stations everywhere, and it's always so much fun to take photos of dogs riding the trolleys. August 30th is our next behind the scenes tour. This one is going to visit our archive. So if you joined us for a previous one, we did not previously visit the Reliance building where our archives are. So this one will be a little bit different. And our volunteers are leading these. So each one will be a little bit different. You'll get to hear different perspectives from each volunteer who gives the tour because all of them have their own interests and projects that they're working on. So it's super exciting. All right. And big announcement, sometime in September, we are going to have Free Kids Fall Edition. It's going to be about a 2-week period where kids will be free. So we will publicize that once we have the dates for sure. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Bob Wright. Bob is a lifelong resident of Philadelphia and has been riding transit from nearly day one and continues to do so 60-some years later. As a result of being a part of a family that never owned a car, something not all that uncommon in South Philadelphia where he grew up, he got to ride transit quite a bit and consequently became a fan of the Philadelphia Transportation Company at a very young age. This continued once PTC was purchased by SEPTA. Bob grew up around the corner from the Route 29 trackless trolley and a few blocks from the Route 50 trolley and a half block from the Route 5 bus. His interest in transit led him to pursue a degree in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and he went into the transportation engineering field, where he continues to serve as a consultant both for highway and transit projects, with 45 years of experience in the profession. Bob has written several articles for publications on Philadelphia transit over the years, and railroads and transit remain a hobby as he continues to photograph and read about transit history. In his free time, in addition to his transit interests, Bob enjoys gardening, tinkering around the house, walking, bowling, an occasional attempt at golf, and following the Phillies, Eagles, and Flyers. He remains a fan of Big Five college basketball, which he's closely followed since he was a child. He's also an active member of several engineering and professional organizations. Okay, at the end of the presentation, we are going to have a question and answer session with Bob, but we'll leave the chat box open, so feel free to enter questions, comments during the show, and we can read through those at the end. And we are recording. This will be shared on YouTube. And at this time, I'm going to ask everybody to turn off their videos, and everyone is also muted. I'll invite everybody to unmute at the end of the program. So don't be offended if I come around and turn your video off. It's just to decrease distractions during the program. All right, Bob, if you are ready, take it away.
Good evening, and what we're going to go through here tonight is what we'd like to call the South Jersey Rapid Transit Evolution from the bridge line to the high speed line, which is basically what's there today in the form of PATCO. And the part one will be from the beginning up until 1990. And we picked 1990 for no particular reason other than it was just an easy place to stop because there's a lot of information that we're going to have in the first part. So we'll go from here. And again, we have some acknowledgments. A lot of the photos came from the NYC subway site. David Pearman's always willing to share what he has. So if you've posted some that he's put on his site, you'll probably see them here used throughout the presentation, including some of mine. And DRPA, Delaware River Port Authority, which owns PATCO, also has a trove of information that it was willing to share here in a couple of different formats. There's a couple of key books. One was the Lindenwold High Speed Line book, covering the first 20 years of the Port Authority Transit Corporation, written by Bill Vigrass, who some of you may know. And the history of the Ben Franklin Bridge, a little more obscure book that was put out by DRPA. And there are other sources and photos that get shared with me from time to time, and we put them in there. And sometimes I remember who sent them to me, and sometimes I don't. So if you see one of yours and say, hey, that's mine, we probably shared it at some point. And feel free to tell me in the chat if you did. So what we're going to cover tonight is the origins of the bridge crossing and the bridge line, and the evolution of expansion of the bridge line at the PATCO, which happened in the 60s. And then the PATCO startup and changes in the South Jersey transit patterns that it affected as it grew. And as I like to say, it all started with the bridge. As Kristen mentioned, I'm a civil engineer, not a structural engineer, but I know enough about bridges to be dangerous. And the Ben Franklin was near and dear to my heart. I spent a summer there collecting tolls when I was in college, so got to know it well, got to walk up where those fellows are walking in the photo on the right. It's a great view. Just don't look down too much, especially if you don't like heights. But the bridge was something that was desperately needed as it was found. In the late 1800s, there was recognized the need for a vehicular crossing because the only way you could cross the Delaware from Philadelphia to Camden was on the ferries. And there's a picture of the ferries that were operated by the Pennsylvania Railroad. The ferry building was at the foot of Market Street. The Market Street trolleys came down, made that tight loop there, and came back up the little hill there, back up Market Street. So that's how you got there. And when you came back over the river, if you're coming back to Philadelphia, this would change dramatically in the coming years, especially when the Market Street subway was built. And this got elevated, the street level got elevated a little bit, so that hill became a little more pronounced. And the Market Street L actually served the Delaware Avenue ferries. There was a branch that came down an elevated line that came along, served both the ferry terminals, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Philadelphia and Reading, which was further to the south. And again, the L opened in 1908. There's a new organization that was formed to build the bridge, and that was called the Delaware River Joint Commission. And it was created by the New Jersey and Pennsylvania state legislators. The city of Philadelphia was also involved in that. They began to look at what the crossing options were, what we could do here. And they, after looking at some alternatives, decided on a location that started at 6th and Race in Philadelphia, went over to Broadway and Penn and Camden. And it was going to be a long bridge because the clearance that was needed from the War Department at the time, which is now the Defense Department, controls the waterways. The Delaware River is an ocean-going waterway, and Navy ships could come up there. So they declared that they're going to need clearance for the Navy ships, and that would require 135 feet above mean water level. So it was going to be a tall bridge and, again, a long bridge to get up to that level as it came across the shipping channel in the Delaware. So you can see in the aerial photo to the left, the Pennsylvania Railroad ferry pier at Market Street. The Philadelphia and Reading is out of the photo at South Street. And that Market Street L Ferries branch, you can see, makes a hairpin turn, a big U-turn, as it comes out of the ground at Front and Market and wraps around going down Delaware Avenue and stops both at Market Street and at South Street to serve the two ferry piers. So that's how you got across the river until the bridge came along. But the bridge would be quite ahead of its time when it did come along. Again, there were 6 lanes for vehicular traffic. 2 curb lanes were unpaved. There were provisions for trolley tracks placed in the bridge. There were 2 outer structures that were sort of half-built for some future rail service that wasn't talked about. And they also had the 2 walkways. So again, it was truly multimodal. You could travel by car, by bus. There was a toll rate for horse-drawn vehicles. You could walk. And someday you would take a rail vehicle. But that wasn't quite there when the bridge opened in 1926. The bridge is going to be 100 years old, a little over a year, or a little under a year at this point. It was called the Delaware River Bridge at the time. It was the first upstream bridge from the Delaware Bay. The furthest north or south one before the Delaware River Bridge was the Delaware Railroad Bridge, which was about 3 miles to the north. And again, this replaced that as the furthest downstream bridge. It was, when it was opened, the longest suspension bridge in the world. That lasted for about 4 years. Then the Ambassador Bridge at Detroit lapped it a little bit. I think it was a matter of feet, but it was slightly longer. And then, of course, other bridges came along to push it further down the list. Again, when the bridge was opened, there was no rail service. It was still being discussed. Those provisions for the rapid transit track were on the outer flanks of the bridge, both sides. And again, the thought was, yeah, we'll see what we can do. There was a lot of money spent on the bridge. There was a lot of controversy about that because there was money. It's a toll bridge to pay the bonds back. And I think when it would open in 1926, it was thought that about 1941 they could suspend the tolls because they'd pay it off. And don't be surprised by this. In 2025, you're still paying tolls. So again, still paying for a lot of things there. Let me see. I think I might just, no, I didn't. Okay. The anchorage of the bridge, where the bridge cables come down and are tied into that structure and then are tied into the earth, were planned to provide stops for the trolleys that were going to go on the outer roadway edges. And there would be elevators in the anchorages that would connect the surface routes both on Philadelphia and the Camden sides. And if you go in these anchorages, DRPA used to let you go in there. They don't let you go in anymore because there's equipment in there that doesn't make it too easy to see things. But these are like time capsules. There were a lot of artwork in there, the elevators, benches and waiting areas. And again, they were never used because the trolleys weren't there at day one. And trolleys didn't come, but were swirling a little bit. So these were sealed up, never used. And there is equipment in there now to dehumidify the cables and things like that. So it's not that easy and accessible to see things. On the Philadelphia side, there's a doorway about 3 stories up in the anchorage on the Front Street side. And that was going to tie into a direct connection to the Frankfurt L. And the Frankfurt L just opened a few years before the Delaware River Bridge. Didn't have a stop here, but one was going to plan to be here. And you'd walk right out of that door right to the L level and be able to get on the L. If you go down there today, it's not easy to see. There's I-95 is right down here, so it's difficult to stop there and get a glimpse of it. But that door remains there, again, never used. Bridge opened just before the Depression, unfortunately. And the rail line sort of was affected by that. There were thoughts to build something in there, and the joint commission decided to build a line that would go from 8th and Market in Philadelphia to Broadway and Carmen Street in Camden. In Philadelphia, it would share the new Ridge Avenue spur from the Broad Street subway, which terminated at 8th and Market. So there'd be a joint terminal between the spur and the bridge line. That line would go north from there, the 8th and Race, make a hard right, continue under Race Street, go on a diagonal under Franklin Square, and would have a station at Franklin Square, which was roughly 7th and Race Street. And you could see the photo of that down in the lower left. There was also going to be an underground trolley terminal for the future trolley service, and that was going to be provided in the Bridge Plaza just east of Franklin Square Station. And you could see the Bridge Plaza right below all that foliage and trees there, right at 5th Street at the end of the bridge. And there's the Bridge Plaza there. That trolley terminal was built. There were a couple entrances in the Bridge Plaza off 6th Street. The doors are still there. There's one on either side of the stairways. You can see the trolley terminal if you take the speed line today, once it leaves Franklin Square, just before you get to Franklin Square coming over from New Jersey. You can see out, but the windows are tinted. It's not easy to see. All you see is a bunch of light bulbs. But again, there was this large trolley terminal, many tracks, and that's where the trolleys would terminate. And then the passengers would come up and transfer to the Philadelphia Rapid Transit System to get around Philadelphia. And again, here's a little map of what the system was going to be. The bridge line, again, from 8th and Market over to Franklin Square, over the bridge. There was going to be a stop at City Hall in Camden, which was roughly 5th and Market Street. And then it would zip under to Broadway. And at Broadway, there was a tie into a railroad station where you could connect to different rail lines going throughout South Jersey. And the construction began in the Depression. Some bonds were issued to do that. Again, a little controversy because the bonds were supported by the bridge tolls. So again, was that 1941 end of tolls ever going to happen? Probably extended a little bit because, again, I think it was about $11 million in bonds they were going to sell. The Franklin Square Trolley Terminal was built as part of this. Again, there were questions as to who was going to operate that. Public Service, which was a large trolley operator throughout the state of New Jersey, had a lot of local suburban lines in Camden. They were 5-foot gauge. The rest of the system up north was standard railroad gauge, so there was a discrepancy there. They were thought that if this line was built, they could operate it, but they were scaling back their streetcar lines in favor of buses. And a few years later, they had the all-service vehicle, which, if you've heard of that, that's a sort of a hybrid before its time. It was trackless trolley and a bus, had both electric motors and gas engines, and it could pull the poles down and operate just as a gas bus. There were some diesels that were produced later. That hung on for about 15 or 20 years in the South Jersey area. And Philadelphia Rapid Transit had just started operating buses in the early 20s. It began operating its own buses across the bridge. It created a subsidiary called People's Rapid Transit, so of course also PRT. And that later expanded to intercity service. New York and Washington were terminals on that. That was given up early on, and that actually became sort of the precursor of the Greyhound system in the East. What became known as the Pennsylvania Greyhound lines was sort of an offshoot of that, the successor to those PRT services. The PRT also had double-decker buses, which had operated across the bridge, so there was clearance for them to get over. Again, once PRT left, public service came in, and you can see those yellow buses in the postcard at the lower right. That's public service. I think the red one there is the intercity public service, and a different paint scheme. The PRT was also thinking about the bridge service after public service declined that. PRT operated modified Pennsylvania gauge 5 2 1/4, and it would basically come across the bridge and turn around somewhere in the plaza here. And like I said, a lot of what I'm offering is anecdotal. Some of it's historically accurate. I couldn't find too much on the plaza turnaround. I did talk to somebody years ago who said it was just going to come and basically loop around what was the plaza there and transfer the buses, but that didn't happen either. So yeah, the construction moved on. Yeah, the trolley service was not going to be provided. The public buses were used instead. They began the interstate suburban services that are pretty much still there today, although the different route numbers. It actually uses a loop through Center City, Philadelphia that was identical to when that was started in the early 30s, so that hasn't changed much. Although way back when it used Race Street eastbound, that changed to Vine Street a number of years ago. But they basically make this long loop through Center City, Philadelphia to distribute their passengers. Pennsylvania Railroad and the Philadelphia and Reading Railroads had extensive rail service in South Jersey. When the Depression came, again, those were lines that were not high patronage, although the lines that went to seashore points were seasonally busy. And again, as the Depression moved, the two lines kind of combined into the Pennsylvania Reading seashore lines. And the thought was maybe we could put those on the outer tracks. And that would have been a little tough because the dimensions of those tracks and the supports on the bridge would be a little difficult. This is at the outer edge of the bridge, right basically under the cables, but cantilevered out a little bit. So again, putting railroad cars in there might not work so well. Some of the ex-Pennsy lines in South Jersey had third rail operation. There was a little bit of trolley wire in Gloucester City for some reason. I think it was a local ordinance. So it was thought at least they could do it. But again, they were sort of the MP54 size, if you're familiar with those, that the Pennsy ran on the commuter lines in the New York and Philadelphia area. So big, heavy railroad cars. And the dimensions of the subway weren't really accommodating. So the thought was that the railroad use was not feasible. So for those poor, unhappy PRSL commuters, they had a 3-seat ride at one time, the trains to the ferry or a bus, and then PRT on the Philadelphia side. And that was going to continue if they took the bridge line. So no net change for them. So still a long trip, unfortunately. The decision came along again. The bridge line would basically be built as a rapid transit line. It was built to the BMT and Broad Street subway clearances, which would allow 67.5-foot long, 10-foot wide cars. And PRT would operate it under contract. The Joint Commission owned the line, purchased cars, PRT operated those. The cars would be based at the city PRT Fern Rock shops up in North Philadelphia for maintenance. And a small yard was provided beneath the bridge on the Camden side just for layups and storage. The fleet was ordered from Brill, 26 cars, just over $1 million for the fleet. They were equipped with 4 motors because the bridge grades were fairly steep railroad-wise. And again, there were some steep subway grades on the Philadelphia side where lines tucked under other lines. And it was a basic 8-minute trip end to end. And again, an option for some commuters. But again, if you were taking a bus anyway, you'd stay on the bus. If you were taking the ferries, this was a little faster. But it was an option. And the construction costs came in totaled about $10.7 million. Again, $11 million in bonds were sold. And the PRT fare was charged for this, which at the time was an 8 cents or 7.5-cent token. You buy 2 for 15 cents. But you did have a 3-cent bridge toll that was collected if you got off on the New Jersey side or got on. So you had to carry 2 tokens. There's one of the bridge line tokens is displayed there. And again, the interior of the bridge line cars is up in the upper right. And they were pretty opulent for their time, nicely done, deep leather seats, well lit. So a nice car to take across the bridge. The upper left photo there is the bridge line, that small yard underneath the bridge on the Camden side. And there's a couple shots of the bridge line cars that were purchased. Again, kind of, I think somebody described them as Flash Gordon-y or, a little Art Deco-y. Interesting looking cars and interesting sounding cars. Very nice cars to ride, very peppy cars. Get up to top speed pretty quickly. So the bridge line opened in June of 1936. Again, it was limited utility, so it wasn't a big hit. There wasn't a lot of ridership. The commuters coming off the PRSL at Broadway, it was convenient for them. But again, you still had to change once you got into Philadelphia, depending where you were going. There was some capability for free transfers to the Market Street subway L and some other surface lines in Philadelphia. But again, if you went beyond a certain point, you had to pay a full fare. So it was, again, basically a downtown to downtown line. It really was affected by the bus service the public service had. Again, the buses were going to the same place. If you were on a bus, why change? And the public service buses had to put better delivery routing. The Bridge Line brought you right into 8th and Market, which was the center of the universe as far as Philadelphia department stores were concerned. And again, if you were working someplace else and the office buildings in Philadelphia tended to be west of there, again, you would have to either walk or take a PRT line. So again, if you could take the public service bus, it might be better off. You did have to sit through a long loop in Philadelphia, but again, it might be worth it. And again, that 3-seat ride wasn't really a benefit to most. So again, the ridership was a little low. And the couple of options were being planned. Philadelphia was building a rapid transit system. Part of it was the Locust Street subway, which was built during the Depression but never completed. And that was thought, again, that would extend the Ridge Avenue spur from 8th and Market down to Locust Street up to 16th and Locust on the south edge of Center City, Philadelphia. And that would enhance the delivery options of the Bridge Line, but again, it wasn't built. The Depression was the first impediment, and World War II came along, and the shortage of materials and the related problems kept that subway basically a shell for a while. Franklin Square Station, again, not really convenient to anything, not really anything around it. Very low patronage, and it was closed in 1939, so that only lasted 3 years. But again, not to spoil it, but you will see the Franklin Square name come up a couple times in this presentation again. So it looks like it'll come back. And one thing that was good was the war did increase ridership. There were shipyards in Camden, and RCA was there, a number of defense employers. And anyone coming over from Philadelphia on a bus found themselves out of luck when the rubber and other shortages came along, fuel, things like that. A lot of the public service bus lines were cut back to the Jersey side, so no longer crossing the bridge. So those trying to get over from Philadelphia to Camden had the Bridge Line and maybe a skeleton group of public service bus routes. So the Bridge Line patronage did shoot up during the war. And the fleet was taxed pretty well. We did get pretty good ridership to the point where some of the Broad Street subway cars were used on the Bridge Line. And if you see in the photo on the right, there's a train laying over Broadway, and the first car in the train is a Broad Street subway car. Kind of looks like one of the South Broad Street newer cars. Again, if this service was operated this way, there was usually at least one Bridge Line car in a consist. And I've been told they were slower because, again, the Broad Street subway cars had 2 motors, Bridge Line cars had 4. So trying to take a train load of these up a hill, a pretty substantial grade, it's not going to do as well. Of course, after the war, the buses came back, the ridership went down. A lot of trains, especially in the off hours, started to operate as single cars. Some of the fleet was converted to add dynamic brakes with the single car. Again, that was needed just in case the brakes were lost on a grade. If you had more than one car in the train, again, you could rely on the other cars to brake, but a single car, you lost the brakes, you lost the brakes. So the dynamic brakes were added to not to all the cars, and attempted to find out which ones had it and did not find out. It was not able to find that out. So if somebody knows, wants to pass that along, that would be good to know. Again, there's that Franklin Square name again. The ferry services were given up in March of 1952. There were still some riders hanging on to the very end. Again, the wartime reductions did enhance the ferry service a bit. But when the ferry services closed, the thought was, well, people might be coming back to the Bridge Line. Franklin Square was opened. Again, people didn't come back to Franklin Square, so within a year that was closed again. But again, not to spoil it, but you'll see that name come up again. The Locust Street subway was fully opened in February of '53. And new service patterns and options were offered. A lot of the Bridge Line trains would go to 16th and Locust. Again, offering new terminal or new service points in Center City, and new ways to get different places, and that enhanced ridership a little bit, but not a whole lot. Again, the Bridge Line was competing with the bus service, and especially after the war, competing with private automobiles. So you just weren't getting anywhere. And again, the patronage was seen as it's never really going to change, even with some of the changes in the Bridge Line service patterns. And you can see there's a late day picture of the Broadway station in Camden. You can see doesn't get a whole lot of use, a lot of weeds there, not the most attractive place to be in the world. But if you were coming up on the PRSL, that's where you'd stop, because again that service beyond Broadway stopped when the ferry stopped. And again, this is where you would make your change to the Bridge Line. Come from a above ground station up on an embankment down to the subway level. The Joint Commission became the Delaware Port Authority in 1952. And one of the things that was looking at is Ben Frank, the Delaware River Bridge at the time was getting a lot of use. They were looking at having a second river crossing about 3 miles downstream that would become the Walt Whitman Bridge. And I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. The Delaware River Bridge got renamed to the Ben Franklin Bridge at that point because, again, there was another bridge coming along, and you wanted to differentiate between the two. And the EIPA also took it upon itself to look at the Bridge Line and see what can be done with it. Is there something where, again, you get tapped to South Jersey traffic and commuter patterns, and try to get some of those people off the bridge and onto the Bridge Line. And when it first looked at the options, it was not using the Bridge Line. They were looking at a new river tunnel that would come into Philadelphia. And again, if you look at the picture on the right there, again, there's a Broad Street subway car, one of the South Broad Street cars, connected to a couple of Bridge Line cars making the journey across. This is Horse Street, just before the line goes underground at the end of the west end of the bridge. As far as the service patterns on the Bridge Line, again, combining that with the Ridge Spur, got a little interesting, and it kind of evolved into a pattern where you had a Y operation. The Ridge Spur ended at Girard on the Broad Street subway. It would come down the Ridge Spur, go through 8th and Market, go out to 15th and 16th Locust, come back east, go through 8th and Market again, cross the bridge, go to Broadway. And the same thing would happen on the return trip, go from Broadway over the bridge, 8th and Market, up Locust Street, back down Locust Street, then out the Spur, go out to Girard. And that lasted for a while. Again, there was not a whole lot of patronage on the Ridge Avenue, or the Ridge Avenue did have good patronage. The Locust Street subway did not. Again, it kind of skirted the south side of Center City. There was not a whole lot there employment-wise or anything like that. So again, looking at this, it was sort of decided that we'll put one shift of cashiers at those stations. The Locust Street line will become a sort of expanded peak operation. So you'd have an 8-hour shift for cashiers going from 6 to 10 and through the 6. That would be the Locust Street element of this. At other times, the Y would basically stop at 8th and Market, come down from Girard again to 8th and Market over the bridge, back to 8th and from Broadway to 8th and Market, and back up the Spur. So that was pretty much it. So the Locust Street subway had some limited utility, but again, was not bringing in the patronage that was hoped for. In 1959, the Broad Street subway had its express service expanded. It had been an all-local line until that point, and some of the express tracks that were in place were used basically during the day. So it wasn't even as peak hour service. It was daylight, and it actually ran on Saturdays as well. And it was a different pattern with some local, some expresses. And the Spur, when these express were running, the Spur would actually be extended from Girard to Erie to serve the local stations up on that part of the line. So again, that Y pattern going up from Erie to 8th and Market, 15th, 16th over the bridge, so on, got a little longer when during those daytime express service, again, when the Locust Street subway was open. The stop on the Ridge Spur after Spring Garden was called Vine at the time. Now that's Chinatown. And if you ride the spur, Spring Garden is closed, so there isn't much. Once you get on the spur, it's a very short and a handful of stations operation today. Back to the expansion again, the URPA looked at doing something with this. Again, nothing would extend the bridge line. They were looking at 3 lines that would tap into South Jersey from downtown Philadelphia. One would go sort of straight east out to Moorestown. One would go on a diagonal following an old PRSL line down to Ashland. And the third would follow south, another PRSL line that was actually third rail, and sort of jog into Woodbury Heights. The Moorestown line was not entirely PRSL, but parts of it were. But they would use the PRSL rights of way to the extent they could, and then there would be some adjustments to those railroad services that would tie into these somehow. But again, this was a study, and the big surprise there, again, that would go on a new tunnel under the Delaware River that would extend up to Arch Street. There was some existing subway that was built under Arch Street that was never used, and that would tie into this and take that someplace. And again, it's not clear where it would go as far as downtown Philadelphia. But the surprising assumption, again, is that the bridge line would stay the way it was, and there would be some future consideration. So as you can imagine, you studied this, the tunnel is going to be expensive, and that came back that, again, this tunnel was going to be, a very expensive tunnel. One of the justifications, though, was, again, the tunnel would be able to serve all 3 lines, and the bridge line, because of the grades and the operation in Philadelphia, the S-curving around a little bit, had some constraints. So whether all 3 lines could use the bridge line was part of that study. But again, the cost of the tunnel and the branches were just, again, in the late 50s, $242 million, which I did calculate out. And I think it's somewhere around $2 billion these days or something, or some astronomical number. But it didn't fly. And again, it went back and said, okay, look at the same 3 branches, but use the bridge line. Again, these would split off of the bridge line east of Broadway. And that would, again, use the Locust Street subway. That would be turned over to this new line exclusively for the downtown access in Philadelphia. And that would force the Ridge Spur to turn at 8th and Market. And the thought was, let's even take it out of the existing subway station. So a new single track terminal would be constructed at the concourse mezzanine level for the spur. The track connections between the bridge line and spur would remain. Again, the thought was that PTC may operate this line as it was operating the bridge line, and that would give the line shop access if necessary, and again, tie into the PTC system. The Ashland line was determined to have the highest ridership potential as it went down a very established area, very developed, sort of split the difference between Haddon Avenue and Whitehorse Pike in South Jersey, if you're familiar with those roads. Very busy roads, very busy transit corridors. Again, there was the PRSL line on that route and the very high ridership among this remaining PRSL routes. And of course, the parallel public service bus routes on Haddon Avenue and Whitehorse Pike were also high ridership. Again, people weren't driving downtown as much as taking those very dependable services. So the thought was, if that extension could be effected, that again, that could draw from that those lines and the high ridership and tie into the bridge line and get it built. So that was part of that study was, again, the recommendation that the bridge line be used and, again, upgrade the facilities and stations and then tie it into this new line to Ashland. Again, going through the established areas, you can see on the photo on the upper right, PRSL operated just about all RDC trains at this time. Here's a stop at Cuthbert, which is Cuthbert Road, which the high-speed line jumps over between Collingswood and Westmont today. Another shot of an RDC car. Often single cars were used for this. And again, you've got a ridership potential in that busy corridor. The cost estimate was calculated to be $94 million, and that would include the new construction and the purchase of the right-of-way down to Ashland. PRSL would keep a portion of the line in the right-of-way at Westmont. There's a branch that turns off, goes to the north, ends up at the Delaware Bridge. goes over to Pennsylvania. So that's the freight connection over to the rest of the country, basically. And there would be some changes in the South Jersey rail service as far as freight service, continuity, and new yards. So the Pavonia yard in Camden would be greatly expanded to pick up some of this. And that would be done not as part of the rapid transit project, but as part of railroad work that would be done. So the design work for the new line begins in 1962. The PRSL right away is purchased. And again, the PRSL would continue to use it just east of what was going to become the Westmont station. And the line was extended. The line was going to stop at Ashland. Again, there was no real capability to put a yard in or anything there. There was space further east, so the yard was placed, and it was in a part of Lindenwold Borough called Kirkwood. So instead of the Ashland line, this became the Kirkwood line. And that yard would be used, and again, that allowed one more station to be considered to get us down to Kirkwood. But Kirkwood is part of Lindenwold Borough, and the mayor of Lindenwold asked that that terminal be called Lindenwold. So instead of the Kirkwood High Speed Line, this was going to become the Lindenwold High Speed Line. And it was also determined that there was a new interchange station that was going to be built at the Lindenwold terminal, so PRSL patrons could change there if they wanted to. The trains would continue over the Delaware Bridge and into through the street station in Philadelphia, but you could change at Lindenwold if you wanted to. And you can see there's a picture of what used to be the PRSL Haddonfield station, an old one locomotive pulling some Pennsy P70 coaches through there. Again, that new station at Lindenwold, there's a rendering of it. The rendering has some accuracy. Again, the RDC trains were going to be off on a separate platform where you would change. The cars kind of look like the cars that were going to be built by Bud. There was a large parking lot. Those residential towers never materialized, but otherwise fairly accurate. So the line, again, the PRSL line was basically at grade, lots of grade crossings, not good for the rapid transit, so the line would operate on an embankment and viaduct to avoid grade separation, to avoid grade crossings. There would be some surface running, not a whole lot. Again, in Haddonfield, a very old, established, and influential community, let's say, they looked at this and they said, we don't want an elevated line. We want you to be in a cut. That's going to preserve the nature of our community. So again, they got what they wanted. And you can see on the lower left, the photo, the tracks do come in a cut. 2 levels, one for the speed line, and the one at the north is for the rail line with the increased clearances that the rail line would need, because that was capability for freight as well as passengers. So you had high and wide capability in the cut there. The construction gets going in 1966. Again, the realignment of the PRSL services was part of that. And again, the railroad did a lot of removal of rail lines, realignment of the freight services and everything in the Camden area. So when the map that you used to see on the cars, the Southern New Jersey Rapid Transit map that was posted on the wall of the cars, the existing bridge line again went as far as Broadway. The new construction went south and east of there, picked up basically 6 more stations down the line, eventually 7. And again, that embankment viaduct running, this was what Haddonfield would look like in this rendering on the right. Again, elevated line crossing over Kings Highway, the main downtown street in Haddonfield. Again, the Haddonfield people saw this and apparently said, no, we're going to what you see on the left there. That ends up in a cut. So they got what they wanted. And it's interesting. You hardly know the speed lines there. You can hear it if you're close enough. But again, it did change the nature of the line, especially where it was elevated in other places. So again, you had 6 existing bridge line stations that would, once you got you as far as Broadway, you would add on 6 new stations for the new construction. Woodcrest would not be one of those. That would come later. Again, a little spoiler on that. But you can see, again, there's a variation of construction techniques. You had a little bit of a cut here, some railroad bridges in Camden, then you're up on an embankment. In Collingswood, you're on a viaduct, then an embankment around the Westmont station, another viaduct. Going from Westmont through Haddonfield, you're going to cut again. Just east of Haddonfield is the surface portion of the line, which takes you down to just shy of Ashland, and then on an embankment, and there's some surface running when you get to Lindenwold, but you're still a little higher than ground level. And again, that PRSL track is in the right of way just east of Westmont down through to the Lindenwold station. Again, PRSL services would change. They wouldn't go to downtown Camden anymore. Again, the track was not there because the speed line took over the right of way. Some services would continue through Cherry Hill on that connection to the Delaware Bridge, go up and over the 30th Street in Philadelphia. If you're familiar with that, that's a long sort of winding line, the big U, if you want to call it that. And if you took that train, you ended up, again, there was only one stop once you got on the Philadelphia side at 30th Street. If you were going to Center City, you're west of Center City at 30th Street, so you'd have to find your way east, either walk, take the Market Frankfurt L, the subway surface trolleys, or local buses. So it was a lot easier to make this change here and take the speed line the rest of the way, or vice versa when you're coming back. PRSL also determined some of the trains were going to terminate or originate at this terminal at Lindenwold, just because that's, again, they weren't seeing everybody wanting to ride all the way into Philadelphia that way. So the interchange capability was put in with that platform, and very Spartan kind of, as you can see here. But again, the speed line would get you much better delivery into Center City. A lot of the PRSL services also oriented to the shore points in South Jersey, Atlantic City, Ocean City, Wildwood, Cape May. Surprising number of commuters took that every day. It's a long trip. But again, that was determined that a lot of those trips are probably just going to go from Lindenwold or to Lindenwold rather than go through to Philadelphia. So that's sort of a service pattern that evolved, and eventually that's as far as the service went later on in the process. As I mentioned earlier, at 8th and Market, the Ridge Spur was moved to a new terminal, a single-track terminal up above the speed line tracks. That was constructed at the concourse level, or mezzanine, if you want to call it that, above PATCO. Seeing a little diagram here, little rudimentary thing that the engineer drew here. Ridge spurs on the upper level, that single track, that green track goes up, ties into the rest of the spur. At Chinatown Station, it becomes double track again. PATCO coming over from New Jersey after Franklin Square goes down on a lower level to get to the Earth Street Station. And there was a third track here, which was the way that the Ridge Spur trains would get down to that lower level and be able to either go through or turn back. And PATCO again tied in, and trains coming out of say to the north, out of 8th and Market, could go either up the spur or over to New Jersey. That center track was actually stub-ended, and that became sort of a storage track or a turnback track over time. And the connection was left from outbound PATCO to outbound Ridge Spur for many years. That was finally taken out, I believe, in the late 80s. And there's actually a fence there now, so you can't even walk through the right of way anymore. I think that was done to prevent some vandalism. So you can see modern day Broad Street train on the spur. The spur usually runs 2-car trains, but ties up here at 8th Street and backs out the other direction, goes back up the spur. The Bridge Line stopped serving passengers at the end of December in 1968. That would allow the work that was going to be needed on the bridge trackage and the Locust Street stations to bring it up to the new standards for the PATCO line. And as that closed, the Bridge Line fleet got moved out to the Lindenwold yard where it was stored. There was no real thought given to what was going to happen with that. And again, at this time, SEPTA had just taken over PTC. There were some rumblings at the time that maybe SEPTA would buy the Bridgeline cars for the Broad Street subway. That the youngest cars on the subway were 30 years old at that time. The oldest cars were 40 years old. So if you're going to buy, almost 40-year-old cars to enhance the fleet, maybe that's what you do. But again, no real discussion was given to that. So PATCO again started to come along. There's a new logo and rebranding and all that. So this is on one of the head houses on the Locust Street side. This sort of stylized logo was for the what was the bridge line. A new fleet was ordered from the Bud Company, 75 cars, 25 single units, 50 were married pairs. They were very unusual. I remember the first time I rode them, I was used to subway cars where you had motormen and conductors in the cabs, and they never left. And later on, in my teenage years, I went to New York City and watched, a little surprisingly, when the conductors came out of the cabs between stations, I would talk to you or give you information. I'd never seen that in Philadelphia. But here, the cab was completely open. The operator was here on the left side because the line basically had all island platforms, so it was easier to have this. And again, there was only going to be one operator who was going to control the doors, so that was an easier place for the operator to be. Another oddball thing here was that the single units had that single leaf door. You can see in the photo on the right, there's a door right behind the cab. And that was there for off-hours fare collection. And again, when the line was being thought about, this was going to be, you'd pay a fare just like if you rode a public service bus, you would pay, and then the operator would have a register. You'd get a receipt based on your distance or zones that you traveled. And in the off hours, the thought was, you wouldn't have those cashiers or whatever, but you would just ride. You'd go down to the platform, wait, and when you got on, that single leaf door would open, and the operator would turn around and work a fare box and work a register and pay your fare there. That never really happened. So, that was provided. But the other nice thing about this was the railfan seat. And if you rode the line, it was that seat right across from the cab. Great place to watch, right up front. PATCO got a lot of rave reviews from railfans because it had the railfan seat, which also had a windshield wiper, which they did use. So it was a good way to see the line. Again, there's a look at the operator's console in a photo on the lower right. That's what you saw. Again, if you were riding in a railfan seat, you look over, you'd see the operator doing whatever he was doing here. You had see those green and yellow and red lights there. That was basically the speed control because there were no wayside signals. Again, this was all automatic train operation, but that was there to let the operator know what speed zone he was in, how fast he was permitted to go. When this cab wasn't in use, there was a little cover that was put on and locked. So, you could go sit in a chair. There was only a little swinging door that kept you out of it. And, if you want to go play operator at the other end of the train, you could, but, you really didn't have any access to the controls. So you had to imagine that part of it, I guess. So again, the line became known as the Lindenwold High Speed Line. And for good reason. Again, it did offer high-speed service. Things going on there. So catch up here a little bit. Sorry. Again, the rebranding to the PATCO line. There's the cars, a couple of single units. You can see with those single leaves. This is at Lindenwold Station. This is the early days of the operation. Started operating right at the beginning of 1969. And the operation started as going from Camden, basically Broadway Station, through to Lindenwold. So just about all the new portion of the line, all within New Jersey. And this was basically to get people used to the service, and of course the operating staff and everybody could see what's going on, and they could start to break in the fleet. And not all the fleet was on hand for this. They had about 30 cars ready for service. That was a concern. Once they started operating in Philadelphia, they would need a lot more. Probably the whole contingent of the 75 that they ordered. But again, there was low ridership. Again, there wasn't too much to go to in Camden, unfortunately, but that was anticipated to be. Again, this was more to see how things operated, to work the bugs out or whatever. The line operated basically 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. The automatic train control, again, not quite ready, so it was manual operation, which means, again, those signal lights on the console would work, and that would tell the operator what speed they could go at. But it wasn't an automatic operation, which was the plan for the line, ultimately. And the automatic fare collection, again, they moved away from that register fare box kind of thing into a magnetic card sort of system, and we'll get more into that. But early on, that wasn't quite ready. So there was one base fare for all the New Jersey stations, and you paid into a fare box. PATCO borrowed some fare boxes from SEPTA, just had I think they hired Kelly temps to run that at each station, so you just paid your 40 cents at the time and you got your ride. Not long after, again, but on February 69, a through service started into Philadelphia. The automatic fare collection system began. There were 5 zones, again, that if you crossed the bridge or stayed within Philadelphia or Camden, 30 cents. That was comparable to SEPTA's fare at the time. So, you weren't competing at all. If you stayed within New Jersey, it's 40 cents. If you went from Philadelphia to Ferry Avenue, 40 cents. Philadelphia to the next 3 stations, 50 cents. And then Philadelphia to the end was 60 cents. Again, this depended, again, on a lot of drivers coming in. The stations were where they were. Not all were walkable from where people lived, although Collingswood, Westmont, Haddonfield, they were pretty close to residential areas. But the outer stations, you needed parking. And Ferry Avenue was close to some major highways. So there were large parking lots that were provided for the service. There was some limited parking where you had viaducts on Collingswood and Westmont. There was some limited parking. Haddonfield didn't have too much parking, but you can see in the photos, again, large parking lots, often full, again, becoming very popular. And that became the critical point on the line that, could you accommodate more parking because there was a high demand? People started to use this. It was easier than driving. It was a fast service, not very expensive, a way to go there. Again, the parallel public service buses started to suffer. The Whitehorse Pike and Haddon Avenue lines were among the heaviest in the Southern District. The patronage basically disappeared. And public service did reroute some of its lines. Here's a couple shots of where they came into Haddonfield. Again, there wasn't too much use of that because, again, you're paying one fare on a bus and then one fare on the train. So it started to get a little pricey. And again, the thought was, public service competed with the speed line. So they weren't so sure they wanted to be able to serve up passengers to the speed line, but things would happen. Again, you can see the construction of the speed line. This is on viaducts, again, Collingswood and Haddonfield area. Again, the station's pretty utilitarian as far as the head houses and things like that. Cars were kind of a little modernistic, a little funny paint scheme there, sort of a mustardy yellow, green inserts. I'm not sure who picked it. I'm not one that's going to swear that I know colors better than anybody, but it always struck me as a little odd that the color scheme was used. But again, nice cars, quiet cars, comfortable seating, and pretty quickly you don't see too many standing bars. You see the handholds on the seats. Pretty quickly, a lot of these cars would fill up, and that standee capacity would be taxed on a lot of trains. The bridge line fleet again got moved over to Lindenwold, and early on, again, when they're having some trouble accepting the Bud cars, there was some testing to see if these cars could actually be used in the service. And it would be, again, using 30-some-year-old cars against the modern fleet. They didn't have the capability to go as fast, so there might be some possibility of using on short turns or special trains. But again, it was tried. It was found to be feasible, but nothing ever came of it. So the cars sat at the Lindenwold yard until the Port Authority figured out what to do. A couple of the cars you can see in both these pictures, and the one on the right, again, they got painted into the PATCO red. But a couple of the cars were retained for the work fleet. As you can see on the front of the car in the shot on the right, there were some connections made there to use a snowplow if needed. And it kind of didn't work. They tried it and just pushed snow into the third rail and wasn't really secure on the car. Had a lot of issues, so the snowplow kind of went away, but the mounts still stayed there. So again, what do you do with these cars? Again, that rumor that SEPTA had an interest was tried. I guess it was found to be accurate. SEPTA purchased 23 of the fleet of the 26 for $10,000 each. Put them into the Broad Street subway service. Cool. PATCO kept 3 of them. Originally, we were going to keep 2, which was 401 and 402. And they did keep the ones that had dynamic brakes so that they could run as single cars. And it was later found out that they needed a third. So a third car, 1013, was kept. They were numbered 401, 402, and 403. And you can see the Bridgeline cars fit right into the Broad Street subway. They could be MU'd with the Broad Street fleet. Again, a very smart looking car. Some of them got repainted over the years. This in the upper right and lower right, you can see they kept the Bridgeline blue, but added orange trim and orange doors. There was another more elaborate scheme that came along in the mid-70s that blue and orange stripe with the gray or silver underbody there. But complemented these cars nicely, I thought. And I don't know much about colors. Again, the two shots, lower left and upper right, are the original paint scheme, silver and blue, that was used when the cars were purchased. And the last scheme that they had was just the Redbird red that David Gunn brought with him when he came to Philadelphia. And that got splashed on a lot of the cars. And that was pretty good as far as fighting graffiti and everything. But again, you had 4 different paint schemes and a span of 13 years of service that these cars had once they came to the subway. And all the Broad Street cars, the original fleets, got retired when the B4 fleet came along in the early 80s. So some of these went to museums. Rock Hill, I believe, has one. I think there are a couple at Seashore. But again, that's what they did. Again, the original subway portions of the Bridge Line were refurbished. You had new columns, covers, tiling, dressing, things like that. The concourse on Locust Street down in the lower left here got enhanced, some artwork. And the concourse is kind of not a great place to be. So if you can enhance that, make people feel a little more comfortable, that always works for something. The newer stations were kind of utilitarian, basically shelters, glass block in a lot of places. Very simple architecture, if there is any architecture. But again, one thing that they did have was at the top or the bottom of the stairs, depending on where you were, there was a large landing. And again, that's a good place where you could wait rather than go out onto a hot or cold platform. You had climate control and you were under a roof. So you could wait there until you saw the train coming and go out and catch the train. So that was a nice little add-on there for patrons. Again, some shots of the stations. The lower left there is a shot of Lindenwald early on. And again, that's part of the automatic bill collection network where you had to go through a turnstile and you'd buy a magnetic card from a machine. You could see some of the machines there. You had change machines. If you only had dollar bills, you had to get change. Then pay for the ticket, get the magnetic card, insert it into the turnstile. The turnstile was sort of a sort of half moon affair. So when you inserted the ticket, one pair would open up, you'd go through, take your ticket, the other pair would open up, and then you go on your way. You had to hang on to the card because when you got off, you had to reverse that. You stick it into the turnstile, go through. If you had a single ride ticket, that's where it stopped. You didn't get the ticket back. If you had a round trip or a 10 ride ticket, you could get the ticket back and again use that later on. And again, that intermodal transfer capability is that not so great shot on the left side. You can see the RDCs waiting at Lindenwald for that PRSL connection. Again, the bus transfers, if you want to call it that. And interestingly, SEPTA, when it purchased Red Arrow actually had an operation in South Jersey that was on Marlton Pike. And again, that was a legacy line from a purchase years ago. So you actually had SEPTA operation in South Jersey, and SEPTA quickly realigned its services to do some cross-county traffic. You still had the line that ran up and down Marlton Pike, which was the number 54, but you had a number of 54 branches that ran basically from Haddonfield and Ashland stations up into Cherry Hill, tied into Cherry Hill Mall, some other places. So you could take a SEPTA bus, and they actually offered a joint fare service, where you could, again, continue that fare on PATCO or from PATCO on a bus. So that lasted for a while. Then SEPTA finally got out of the South Jersey business in the mid-70s and turned it over to the Transport of New Jersey operation. Again, there's fare collection again. The first generations of turnstiles were those kind of bulky two-stage things. Regular old turnstiles came later. And then today, jumping ahead a little bit again past our time frame, but sort of two-leaf door that opens up to the sides here to go through. So that's the turnstile. And that's again there was some fare evasion or whatever, but you are watched. There's a lot of closed circuit TV, so you won't get far, and you need a ticket to get out. So, fair turnstile jumping was not something that PATCO took lightly. And you can see in the lower right, there's a ticket window. And I said earlier that you had to buy tickets from machines, and that was pretty much the case. But if you bought a 10 ride, there were 10 ride tickets you could buy. They were not offered on the machines. You would come here and buy it from a person who was there at certain times during the day, usually in the morning peak. And you could buy that 10 ride ticket or other variations of things. There were add-ons to continue your ride on SEPTA. There was a round trip ticket that you could buy. There was a machine for that too, but you could also buy that from a person if the person was there. Again, it was the intent was to be fully automated. Again, no attendants except for some stations. There was a call for aid. You can see in that lower right. There was a phone there. If you had some problem, if your ticket didn't work or whatever, you could call somebody who would, again, give you aid, get you through the turnstile, help you out, do whatever. Again, the change machines, ticket vending machines, magnetic cards, fully automated. And the cards were purchased based on origin destination. So if you went from Philadelphia to Haddonfield, again, that was that sort of third zone. Again, you would buy it by destination. You needed it to get in and you needed it to get out. So, it's a single ride ticket. You wouldn't get it once you got out. If you had a round trip or a 10 ride, you'd get it back. It would usually give you an indication of how many rides you had left. And again, those phones were there for assistance. And this system was not new to PATCO. The Illinois Central commuter system in Chicago, which became Illinois Central Gulf when a couple of railroads merged. Now it's Metro, the Metro Electric, they call it. It's an electric line from Illinois Central. Again, they initiated this mag card system, and PATCO sort of borrowed it and used the technology. So it was not inherent to PATCO. BART and WMATA later did this, but they had stored value cards. Again, same thing. You had to use the ticket to get in, get out, and on BART and PATCO, that deducts the fare as far as you traveled on your mag ticket. Again, the Bridge Line subway stations went through a major rehabilitation. The new stations were new. Again, simple architecture, glass block, simple canopies. And the stations actually all the new stations had one escalator, and it was oriented in a different direction. They usually had two stairways coming up from the ticket area, and some stations that was oriented to the back of the outbound or the inbound platform, and so it was oriented to the front, with the idea being that would sort of balance out the passenger load. That, if you had some people going to the front, some people going to the back, then you would have all the cars full. It didn't take long to fill all the cars, though. The line was successful, so that system kind of worked. But you had stairways as well that people could use. Surprisingly, no elevators at the time, but that would come later. Again, sprawling a little bit. The shops were provided at Lindenwold. There's sort of a rough sketch up at the upper right. Number of storage tracks, a small inspection area, a small shop. And again, a 75 car fleet. You didn't need much to do that. They didn't really build much expansion as far as the facilities here. There was a lot of room available, a lot of right-of-way, but again, the capacity was met. Basically, there was a little bit extra capacity there, not a whole lot. Again, you had the expansion, the inspection capability in the shop, and the cars were mostly stored outside between runs. Again, automatic train operation, impulses through the rails, no real wayside signals. You'll see some signals at turnouts and starting signals at either terminal, a couple of starting signals at places where trains used to short turn. But as you can see in the upper right, the trains exiting coming in from Camden on the railroad bridges, coming under I-295 or I-676 here on a pretty sharp curve, ready to go into the portal at Broadway. The center tower is off to the right here, up at the ground level, and sometimes the train will stop here to discharge or pick up somebody that's going to the tower. And again, the operations and closed circuit TV cameras were at the center tower, so that monitored all the stations, all the train operation. If you called for aid, that's who was here. They could see you on the closed circuit TV, what was going on. And again, you can see where the line goes into Broadway It ties into the old line in the lower right. The initial service patterns were a little interesting. Again, part of this was, again, there were a lot of riders on the outer stations. So the idea was to get cars down and back pretty quickly. Again, in the peak hour, you had headways down to 4 minutes at the load line, balanced out to about 10 to 15 in midday, usually 12, 20 to 30 on the weekends, 60 minutes overnight. And it was found that 70 cars in the fleet of the 75 were needed for peak service. So that put a strain on the fleet. And again, you had 4 to 6 car trains in the peaks, depending on what the service was. In the midday, it went down to 2 cars. On the nights and weekends, it was often a single car. And again, the operations were set up to maximize that fleet with skip-stop service and all that. Again, high speed line, 75-mile capability, and the speedway, the long stretch between Haddonfield and Ashland, which was mostly on the surface. So it was 22 minutes end-to-end service for locals. Some of the expresses were a little faster, but they had to slow down at the stations, so they weren't coming through at full speed. But it was found that took a lot of toll and wear and tear on the cars. So to ease that up a little bit, the speeds were dropped a little bit to 65 miles an hour max. They could still get end-to-end in about 22 minutes, which was, again, I'm not sure how they did it, but I think, again, it was, all in the, again, that the one speedway was really the limiting factor. And you can see the early service patterns. There were locals that made all stops. There were some peak hour, peak directions expresses, Lindenwold, which skipped a bunch of stops. Again, to get to and from the outer stations. There were Haddonfield locals. There were usually put-ins in the morning, and trains that went to Haddonfield left service once they got there. Made all the local stops between downtown and Haddonfield. Ferry Avenue was also an interesting place. There were short turns there. Ferry Avenue had a lot of patronage because of the large parking lots, so you did have short turns there. And again, you could run a 4-car train to Ferry Avenue. You weren't carrying, the full load to the end of the line. So that's where those short turns could come in. And again, you could have a pretty good service pattern, get the headways met, and get people moved. Early on, again, in the process, because there were Ferry Avenue shorts, there was a train called a special train, which skipped City Hall, Broadway, and then went down to Ferry Avenue for a stop. Again, they would usually follow the Ferry Avenue shorts. And then in the all service, there were a couple stations that were closed overnight. Again, still, most of the stations were open. And again, hourly service. Single cars, again, on nights and weekends. And the cars had front roll signs and then backlit side signs. And the backlit side signs had these 6 indications. Once Woodcrest came along, that changed the pattern. So the Haddonfield locals got swapped out. They became Woodcrest locals. And you can see here again, there's a single car at Lindenwold's, probably a weekend run. And the train coming off the bridge going westbound into Center City. So again, if, as you could have guessed, the line was a success. First year of operation, over 20,000 daily ridership. After 10 years, that jumped up to about 38,000. Again, spoiling a little bit, a new station came along and pushed this up pretty greatly. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Again, a lot of that was coming from the public service bus routes. The parking lots were full, and there was a clamor for more parking. I wasn't really sure where they were going to put it because they kind of used up what they had space-wise. And again, there was 2 considerations that were coming around. We need more of this service, so we need to extend it, and we need to get parking capacity enhanced, and that was the easier thing. So again, that high demand for the latter, needing more parking was there. And again, you see some of the shots. This was a line that ran, again, snow came, Philadelphia snow was something that scares the bejeebers out of everybody. If you get the PATCO kept going, and that was a good option. So again, people found that and found a way to go. So a little bit of the metrics coming here. Again, the total, when you look at the civil cost, then the fleet counted into that, about $102 million dollars were invested in the line. They all came from the Port Authority revenues, mainly from the bridge tolls, as well as the fares that were collected. So there was no outside funding or anything other than what the RPA had. That was a little controversial because, again, there were people that didn't want to see the tolls subsidize transit line. And again, when are these tolls going to go away? And the answer for that's probably never, because you've got operating costs and new bridges and things like that. But again, looking at early on, the fall 1971 analysis was made. You had about 36,000 weekday ridership. Some days that went up to as high as 40,000. Wednesday nights in downtown Philadelphia, the department stores stayed open till 9 o'clock at night. I know it's unheard of these days, but again, there were lots of patronage. People would come in and go to the department store. So Wednesday was a high ridership day for that. And it was a little taxing on PATCO because you had people coming in when the peak ridership was going the other way, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So it kept them on their toes, let's say. But of those riders, again, 40% were new to transit. They previously drove. So you took 40% of those people off the roads and put them on the PATCO. 36% came from the bus services, 11% from the railroads. And interestingly, 13% of them didn't make the trip before. So they found a reason. Maybe they changed jobs or whatever, but they had not made that trip in any way, shape, or form in the past. So PATCO gave them a reason to make that trip. How did they get the PATCO? Again, 40% of them drove, so the parking lots were key. Very surprising number when I saw this. I knew it was high, but didn't think it was this high. Again, 50% was the drop-off pickup thing, the kiss and ride. And again, just about every station in the new section had the capability to have people dropped off and picked up later on. And again, another surprising number, 10% walked or biked. And again, Collingswood, Westmont, Haddonfield in particular, you're in established communities close enough to do that. A friend of mine's dad biked that for years. Was very happy with that. There was bike racks and accommodations at the station. So he was very happy to do that. And again, there were some places, squeeze some parking spots in here and there, got the number up to 5,700, nearly 100% utilized every weekday, and pretty heavily utilized on the weekends as well. And how can you get more parking? And the thought was a long stretch between Haddonfield and Ashland, in an area of Cherry Hill called Woodcrest, was a space where a new station could be built. And you could put some more parking capacity in here that would draw some from Ashland and Lindenwold, which were kind of getting overtaxed. And there was another nice thing here. I-295, New Jersey Turnpike, crossed the speed line almost within a couple hundred feet of each other, just west of the station location. And the thought was, again, the PATCO went to New Jersey DOT, said, can we get like an interchange of some sort here that would allow people to go right to the station? And surprisingly, the highway agency said, they looked at it, they studied it, and they said, that sounds like a good idea. So that was all undertaken. Again, a new station at Woodcrest was designed. And interestingly, again, the PRSL parallel track, which was not used very much west of Lindenwold, was used for PATCO during the construction of Woodcrest. The inbound trains would switch over to that track. The outbound track would kind of go through the station. There was a new track that would be built into the station as well. And it was interesting to ride that because the trains came through much slower and it was all jointed rail. So if you're used to the PATCO quick ride and continuous welded rail, now you're in for this old branch line thing where you just clickety-clacked over it. But it was an interesting ride for a while. And again, another shot of that. Here's the overpasses again, Turnpike and I-295 coming in here. I-295 is the one furthest away or underneath the inbound train there. And here's the train when they're back on their own in the lower right back or lower left back on the PATCO track coming into the new Woodcrest station. So expansion wasn't just going to happen on New Jersey side. That Franklin Square station once again came along. Can we open up another station in Philadelphia? Franklin Square was seen, okay, we could do this. It was close to the historic areas, an old city. It would offer some relief. 8th Market was a very busy station. Again, the anticipated crowds that were coming for the bicentennial was thought that if you get them at Franklin Square, they're a little closer to some of those historic spots. And the station was already there, so it was really relatively low cost to implement it, put some improvements in, get the turnstiles in, clean the place up a little bit. So again, in 1976, Franklin Square reopened. And as Franklin Square usually does, a couple of years later, low patronage, it closed again. So that was sort of the end of Franklin Square. And the thought that PATCO had at the time was, well, we tried, it didn't work. So that's it. It's not going to happen again. But again, spoiler on that. On the other side of the river, though, again, Woodcrest was very popular. It was found that that was going to increase ridership dramatically. And again, that fleet constraint was still there. So the RPA went out and said, let's look for additional cars. They wanted to have cars that looked the same and operated the same. Went back to Bud. Bud said, how many do you want? They said, no, we only need about 50. Bud said, no, not interested. They were building the M fleet and some other cars. So they had that tied up. Went to some other builders. They had other commitments where the order was too small. So the thought was here that, they put the tenders out. An outfit called Hawker Siddeley in Canada, which became Canadian Vickers, took the order, became 46 cars, and they came in toward the end of 1979. First cars came in, went through their break-in runs, and the fleet was accepted. Almost identical to the Bud cars, operationally compatible. The spotting feature was the Bud cars had the skirting beneath the floor line, and that was found to have some problems as far as cooling motors and everything with under floor equipment. So that skirting was not on the new cars. So that was the one way you could tell them apart. But pretty much very difficult to tell apart. Even the interiors were almost exactly the same. Again, these were all married pairs. These became known as the PATCO 2 cars, numbered from 251, starting with where the married pairs left off for the Bud cars to 296. So you had this fleet there. Again, Woodcrest Station opens. You get 2,700 new parking spaces. That's great. Some traffic relief on the local roads. Again, mostly all local roads serve these parking lots. And they started to get congested. These are mostly suburban New Jersey, 2-lane roads, limited capacity. So this opened it up. People found their own shortcuts. And the thought was, once we get the interchange at 295, that will siphon off a lot of traffic directly to that. So the interchange took a little longer. That opened toward the end of 82. And again, that did do what it was promised to do. The local roads did ease up a little bit traffic-wise. And Woodcrest kind of broke the mold. Again, their other stations were basically island platforms. At Woodcrest, 2 island platforms were placed with a center track where you could turn trains back or store them. You could have put-ins there or whatever. So again, those few Haddonfield shorts got extended to Woodcrest. When the service was at Haddonfield, it would turn around in a pocket track in the middle, just west of I-295. That's still there if it's needed for turnbacks, but again, especially short-term trains went to and from Woodcrest. And other expansion new service were looked at. Again, Berlin was the one that was probably the one that had the most potential. That was just taking a line another straight 3 miles down along the PRSL corridor from Lindenwold. That was studied, but nothing happened. The 50s proposal looked at that. Again, there was other lines going to the east and south. And that was studied, but there were no funding. And again, the constraints of, could we tax the bridge line? It was already being overtaxed with PATCO going to Lindenwold. So the thought was that might not work so well. But again, capacity was needed. Again, Locust Street and the Philadelphia side subway was something that was a constraint and sort of a bottleneck in a lot of ways. So one thing that was looked at was reverse signaling was installed on the Locust Street subway west of roughly 11th Street, just east of the 1213 station. So you could have single traffic operation in the midday. There are some tail tracks west of 16th Street where some trains could be stored. There isn't much storage space there. But what happened is if you can have the single track operation, then you can have the one track stored all the way down from 16th down to that crossover at 11th. and again use the single track railway between the crossover and the end of the line. There were some impacts on the midday headways only because, again, you're on a single track. You've got to get there, unload, turn around, do whatever testing you need, and get out. So there was, again, where we had 10 or 15-minute headways that probably went more toward 15 at the time, only because of the time that was needed to turn those trains around. And they did find ways to quickly turn them around, get operators. I mean, at some point, they were looking at 2 operators, and one would just take over the other end. That didn't last that long. There was that, again, pocket track at 8th Street. Occasionally in the schedule, a short turn would show up at 8th Street in the peak, would back at the end of the pocket track, and then come out as a pull-in for the PM peak. That had its limitations. Again, it faced the wrong way, so you had to go against traffic to get into the pocket or get out. So that did put some constraints on things, but that's still used occasionally. Also, I took the line right at the end of June. I was making a short trip. Got down there. There was a train that was broke down, so they shoved it into the pocket and got things back to normal. So you do see operation error every so often. That bridge yard, again, if you look at the picture on the lower right, you can see the leads into the bridge yard. The train is going into the tunnel, outbound, having come off the bridge. But again, that's operation difficult because it's wrong way operation. That was oriented for trains coming out to go into the outbound track and wrong rail. So again, there are some constraints there. And in part 2, we'll talk more about the bridge yard. That's changed the nature of it very recently. There's no real storage capacity there anymore. Again, spoiling a little bit. But one thing that became very effective was, again, the institution of more reverse peak expresses and more deadheads, particularly in the morning, where trains would come in, dump their loads, run express back out, or even nonstop to get back out to the outer terminals. And again, spacing them between regular service trains. It's gotten a little more difficult because there's a reverse peak that keeps growing. So again, that impacts the headway. And again, you have fewer seats available and more crowds if you do something like that. But looking at parking again, there are places where you can't do much about parking. One place was Haddonfield. And the novel idea came along in a couple of ways. One was Transport of New Jersey, which took over the suburban bus services that were run by public service. At one time said that, let us run PATCO. We'll figure out how to tie the buses into it. Of course, that's nice. So, hand over the profitable line, and that would subsidize their unprofitable buses. But there was finally a compromise reached, and TNJ realigned a lot of its routes in October of 72, redesignated them, tied them into the high speed line stations, so they became sort of feeder routes. And the fare system was put into place so that you didn't have 2 fares. It was sort of an expanded transfer when you would go from bus to train or vice versa. Part of that was pushed by a 75-day strike that TNJ had in the spring of 72, where when the buses finally came back after a couple of months, most riders defected. So that was sort of the stopgap to keep the bus service going in some way, shape, or form. But there was limited success to it. It was not conducive if you were going from Philadelphia as a reverse commuter. There was a ticket that you would get on the bus that would extend your ride across the speed line. But again, if you started on the speed line, it was not as easy. You had to get a ticket on the Philadelphia side. It was a little more of a learning curve, but people figured it out. But another more successful operation was something called Dial Ride. And again, that was demand responsive bus service that basically centered on Haddonfield. That was started in 1973 through a New Jersey DOT grant. That was very successful. Again, it was basically a taxi service or Uber at the time. You call up, you'd arrange for a ride from your house to PATCO, or from PATCO back to wherever you were going, and they would take you there. You would pay. It was a fare you would pay for that, and it was so successful that Haddonfield Station started to get a little congested. But they also ran some fixed route services in the peak, where they would just go down major corridors and again pick up like a normal bus service. But again, this went further afield from Haddonfield, and it went up to as far as Cherry Hill. in some neighborhoods in the Cherry Hill and Pennsauken area. You could go to Cherry Hill Mall was one attraction that you could get to here. But it worked, but unfortunately the grant was had limited shelf life, so when that expired 2 years after it started, that sort of was stopped. Some of these buses were owned by the state DOT. They were handed over to Transport of New Jersey for subsidized bus service. So they hung on. And again, they dusted off that 50s idea that could we extend service. Again, the Morristown line was revisited to kind of serve, go to the north a little bit, get up to the Burlington Riverton area. The Woodbury Heights line got extended south to Glassboro, which is a state college was there now, Rowan University. And the difficulty was still, again, you could only get so many trains on the bridge line across the bridge and then the Lincoln Street subway. That was your capacity constraint. So the idea shifted away. We can't do anything about that. There were some ideas to look at expanding PATCO in Philadelphia, and again, that'll be more what we'll talk about in part 2 of this. But were there ways to change the capacity of the line without looking at those not easily changed constraints? Again, the studies were too costly. Again, looking at a tunnel or whatever, there's just not in the cards. But New Jersey Transit, which had come onto the scene at this point, starts to think. And again, we won't spoil it. That'll be more in part 2. But the idea was basically looking at a PATCO light or a light rail line of some sort within New Jersey that would feed the passengers in at Broadway or City Hall. So it's not a single seat ride. That's a little bit of impediment for riders, but it would get people across the river, maybe reduce bridge traffic, again, expand the utility of PATCO. So it was out there. It was a thought, but again, consideration would be given to it more. Again, looking at some of the other areas, again, the bridge line stations were given cosmetic improvements. Broadway had some need for reconstruction, so that was closed in 1984. There was a new transportation center that was to be built above Broadway Station at that site, so that started construction. And the center would provide a terminal for the New Jersey Transit suburban and seashore bus routes, and it would simplify the old public service patterns in downtown Camden. Those buses came off the bridge and basically had different routes that they came through Camden and served that crisscrossed each other. So this idea would actually put them out in front of the new transportation center on Broadway. They would all go to the same place and radiate away from there. So that would help as far as intra-line people that were staying on buses to stay in New Jersey side would be able to transfer a little better. Weren't too many of them, but again, the thought was if you changed the routes and made it easier, there would be more. And there was the first thought of, maybe there's going to be a light rail line here that PATCO Light would come through. But, again, that would be built in as a provision in the new station. Again, PATCO needed some maintenance equipment. It did have the 3 Bridgeline cars. It did find 2 old steeple cab locomotives that were at the Niagara Junction Railway. Purchased those in 1973. Again, there were 2 of them. One of them was converted to the third rail operation, the one that's shown. And PATCO did have a small fleet of flat hopper cars that were used. So you had a coupler here. This could rescue any stalled trains as well. There was a couple of backward that you could use for that. So one got that, and one was the organ donor, which hung around for a while. But then in 1980, that was scrapped. I believe the steeple cab's gone too, but more on that in part 2. And again, some maintenance cars, ballast tamper, burr, crane were required for maintenance away operations. And the Bridgeline cars finally got retired. The museums picked them up as well as some of the old Broad Street subway cars at the museums. So some of them are still around. Again, very nice cars, very modernistic cars for their time. It's good that they've been preserved. New Jersey Transit also looked at the old railroad services. Again, they were the last vestiges of those lines ended in 1981. The RDCs went away. Those commuters found other ways. I think most of them probably found a way to drive. But New Jersey Transit said, again, we want to relook at that. Is there potential to that line, especially the Atlantic City service with the expansion of casinos and the attractions in Atlantic City. Amtrak was interested in getting some service into Atlantic City. So all that started to happen. New Jersey Transit rehabilitated the PRSL line. They built a new Atlantic City terminal, extended service over to 30th Street. Again, not the most direct and not the most quick service, let's say, or expedient, but it was there. But that brought Amtrak onto the line. Again, Amtrak started mid 1989. New Jersey Transit followed later on in '89. The old platform at Lindenwold, you can see a high-level platform replaced it. You got a shelter, a couple more amenities. So it's a little easier to make this transfer if that's what you were doing. And surprisingly, it became pretty popular for reverse commuters. You know, people that worked in Atlantic City, lived further along in South Jersey, could take the speed line, transfer here, go to work, and come back the vice versa direction. So that started up again as we're closing up our presentation here. You can see an Amtrak train again with the cab operation, diesel on the front, going through Ashland Station on the railroad track, and a couple more shots of the Lindenwold Station. Again, another operational improvement was Ferry Avenue. Ferry Avenue had the stub track, again, for short turns. You can see the train in the picture sitting in the third, the center track there. Originally, it just came in sort of as a Y, as you can see in the red, the dash lines. This was expanded where we could get two-car train storage capability in here, where, again, the switch layout was changed. Tail track was added for that storage capability. And it was also a place where construction and maintenance equipment could be staged. Once you got that equipment on the line, there were a few places that could pull out of service or get off the main line. So this offered one of those possibilities where work equipment could get out of the way or be stored if it was doing work overnight or anything. Again, once the load line started, that could be stored out on the line instead of hauled back to Lindenwold Yard. And improvements started to happen. Again, the RPA realized it could pursue ULTA and FTA funding, so a little less reliance on the fare box and the tolls. And that fare box and toll revenue could be used to match the federal funding. So there were ways that they found to use this. And there were some difficulties early on, whether a toll authority could use that money. Those sort of went away, and the money was made available. And the PATCO 1 fleet was rehabbed in the early 80s through the mid 80s. And Franklin Bridge tracks and track bed was replaced. There was some rudimentary work done on that originally. The whole system was replaced in the mid 80s. Broadway Station, again, as we mentioned, being reconstructed. The line used ex-railroad bridges that were fairly old through Camden. They were finally rehabilitated in the late 80s. Again, that Ferry Avenue pocket track that we mentioned, that was revised late 80s. And additional parking capacity was found here, there, and everywhere. I mean, there were some long walks from the parking if you were parked on the outer edges to the stations. But by the end of 1989, you had over 12,000 spots, where, again, at the start, you had about 4,400. So greatly expanded. And again, every day they're all full. So it was worth the cost. And that takes us up to 1990. That's where we end this part of the presentation. Again, there's my little squishy ride PATCO toy. You can see it's been through a little bit of squishy. But again, part two, when we do that, we'll pick up from here and go to the present, and we'll figure out a time when that's going to be scheduled. So that's it. If we have any questions at this time, we can see what's what.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bob.
Yeah.
Before we get to questions, I'll give you a chance to read through the chat there. There were a lot of interesting comments that came in, and lots of nice comments coming in now as well. But I just wanted to let everybody know one more time that August 19th, we will have Frankfurt's Elevated Railway Part 2. So staying pretty local for that one. We've had lots of awesome Philadelphia area presentations this year. So I can't see hardly anything in here. Let me look through.
Yeah, I see the chat. The buildings are still standing in Front Market on the west side. Again, the east side is I-95 these days. And coincidentally, I was in that part of town this morning, and I took a look into, yes, they still are there. So, and still providing, that's a greatly revitalized and gentrified area right now. So you get a lot of apartments, condos, things like that. The Ambassador Bridge, yeah, very close to the construction of the Bend. Yeah, the underground trolley terminals. That's what you would have had, something similar to what you had in Manhattan and
the Queensboro
down at the end of Williamsburg at Essex Street there. Okay, for subway standards, yes, they were indeed posh cars, and it was surprising when they went to the Broad Street fleet. At the time, I was riding the Broad Street subway just about every day. They sounded different, so you knew where they were coming. And a lot of people would prefer to ride them because of those deep leather plush seats. Because you had the rattan seats on the South Broad cars. The North Broad cars had the leather seats, but there was also a time when vandalism was out there, so you'd have a lot of sliced open seats and things. And SEPTA's reaction was put in plastic seats or other, not as comfortable stuff. But the Ridgeline cars stayed pretty much with the bucket seats until the end. Again, they did get cut up sometimes, and there was some vandalism. But that's that was it was always nice to get one of those and get a nice comfortable seat. Subway on the Arch Street. There are two sections of the subway. One is around 10th Street. One's around the Convention Center, 12th, 13th Street, that were built, never used. So yeah, most of it would be new, but those two pieces were envisioned to be used. And somewhere along the line, I remember somebody showing me a drawing where, again, that would tie into the 8th and Market line. It was a big loop that was going to be built around Center City for delivery. The trains would come in and run around that loop and deliver passengers, pick them up, take them back. And there was supposed to be a tie-in between what was going to come over from New Jersey and Arch Street to the 8th Street section of the line, which would have been a very sharp connection. It's a pretty tight area. But apparently there was, the two unused stations under Arch Street. Those are those things. Not really, one's not a station, but the other is.
Okay.
Okay.
You're scrolling right through. I'm going to let you.
Yeah. Yeah, if that Philadelphia Rapid Transit plan would have been built with that thing out Henry Avenue and Manioc and all, I'd be taking the subway to work every day, but that didn't happen. So very little of it happened. And it's interesting, if you ride the Broad Street subway, you get that sharp curve at City Hall, and most people think that's because it can't go under the City Hall tower, which is partly correct. But the main reason for that was where the Parkway branch was going to branch off. So it started to make that turn, and actually, the Parkway would have shot out of that turn. So it served two purposes, but no Parkway branch, so it's just the big rest of the Broad Street subway is pretty much arrow straight. That's the one place where it makes that severe curve for no apparent reason. So, right, yeah, Thunderbolt is it's a $3 fare, but still cheap. Well, SEPTA is still $2.50. Technically, I forget. I don't pay fares anymore, so I don't follow it too much. All right, which car? Yeah, I don't know about the lower voltage, but the light bulbs did have covers on them. Unlike the Broad Street lines, they were bare light bulbs. Since the North Broad cars had that sort of strip where they had diffusers, but the Bridge Line cars actually had like fixtures that covered the light bulbs. Now, they might have blown. I don't know. It's very possible, but I can't say for sure. Yeah, the DRPA made the strange decision. If you change the dollar bill again, the highest fare way back when that I remember was 75 cents. I think it was 60 cents originally. So you'd get 4 quarters or whatever. And that changed somewhere along the line in the 80s. They changed it to the Susan B dollars. And that didn't go over so well. But they still use dollar coins to this day. They're not Susan B's anymore, but if you have dollar coins in your pocket, you've probably been on PATCO recently. It seems to be. Let's see, singles. Yeah,
I believe ATM has some PATCO turnstiles.
It's possible. Yeah, we got those old like Half Moon. They were very strange, and they didn't function greatly all that well. So sometimes you get caught in the middle. I remember early on, I did that. I used that for a while for summer when I collected tolls. I used that back and forth, and I would use Franklin Square. And Franklin Square, you didn't get a whole lot as far as patronage. So of course, the turnstiles didn't get a lot of work, and they would fail a lot. And it was interesting when one, you get stuck in between the two leaves, and you could just pull them apart with your hands. But then the person watching you on the camera would then chastise you, like, "What are you doing?" Move from there. So extending PATCO to 22nd. There's a couple ideas. Well, I'll get into that more in part two, but there was a thought to go out to University City and out to the hospital complex out there at Penn. There was another thought to go to 30th Street. Another thought was to go to 20th and Market, where you'd build a whole new Market Frankford line and subway surface line and PATCO interchange, or kind of U back to 20th and Market. So there's a lot of different ideas there that have come about over the years. But again, we'll get into that a little more in part two.
Which we have not scheduled yet. We'll let everybody know once we have a date.
Yeah, which I've not done anything with yet, so that's just as well. It's up here, but the line from Glassboro to Burlington directly. Well, you're onto something. Again, we can. We'll see more about part two. So,
all right.
Yeah, PATCO almost didn't get those Niagara Junction. I've heard that story. They something funny happened here. I've heard different versions of it, but PATCO did end up getting them. But then PATCO found out that one wasn't really of any use. So, okay, thanks for that. Okay.
So I
think a lot of information. I know I went through a little bit, but I think interesting stuff though. I mean, very interesting line.
Yeah. A very chatty crowd tonight, which is always good. Would anyone like to ask a question either in the chat box, or you should be able to unmute yourself now?
Hi, this is Andrew Sudasi. Bob, a question for you. I found you on Instagram that you're Engineer of the Year. Congratulations for Delaware Valley. Just curious, I used to work for DOT and I'm doing some consulting. Who do you work for now?
I work for a firm called Bowman Consulting Group. It used to be called McMahon Associates.
Okay, not one I know.
Civil transportation firms, but do a lot of work for SEPTA, the municipalities, PennDOT, New Jersey DOT. So I did have that title. Yeah, so some people thought that I should have that title. I wasn't necessarily in agreement with them, but I took it anyway. So,
do you know Bill Vigris?
Yeah, I've met. I don't know if Bill's still alive. I questioned. I know someone I asked, and he wasn't sure. But I've met Bill a number of times. Bill worked. He might still be working. He's got to be in his 90s at this point.
I think he's in his 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, but he worked up. I'll give you an interesting story. We one of my engineering societies he was giving a presentation, and it wasn't PATCO. I think it was when he worked in Cleveland. And his slide projector conked out. So it was like, okay, end of story. Well, about 6 people in the audience had slide projectors in their car trunks. I mean, and this was, you never find that these days. But I always thought that was interesting. Like, who carries a slide projector around? And apparently 6 other people did. So Bill, we saved the day. But as Bill kept saying, maybe I should carry a spare. And I said, okay. But of course, nobody carries slide projectors. Well, I'll say nobody I know, but I'm sure somebody does. So that's good. That's good. Thanks for that. It's good to hear he's still alive. But
I think he is. I think he's not well, from what other people told me. He came many years ago, when quite late in my career, I did a master's in engineering and planning at Rutgers, and he presented. He did a slideshow, and of course, most of the students had practically never seen a trolley. This is all stuff. He's a rail fan. He went around in the 50s.
Yeah, Bill. When I talked to him, he had an amazing memory for it. I mean, I used to have one, and now it's like I got to think about it. But Bill would just reel off stuff that and it's like again, up until about age 50, I could do that, but that's a distant memory at this point. You may know the name Vukan Vucic, transportation professor. He introduced me to a lot of these guys, and he was a college professor of mine. He was kind of my mentor. He's still around. He just turned 90 earlier this year.
I know the two at Rutgers,
yeah.
Rail and Booker.
Yeah, Buchik was at Penn, so I mean, but still kind of there. You know, they never leave. But anyway, so Paul,
we do have a hand up in the chat. Paul, go ahead.
I had a question. My understanding is that PATCO is looking at least one light rail line fairly seriously. Do you know any details about that?
Yeah, yeah. It's a spoiler alert for part 2, but you have the River Line that New Jersey Transit built, and that's having a lot of problems these days. But there's a southern component of that goes to Glassboro, and the ERPA is actually New Jersey Transit was going to build it. There were a lot of issues. The ERPA basically took it over and is building it, and it's in construction now. The problem is that one of the downfalls of the River Line is the diesel light rail. It's operated by a contractor, but they're having trouble getting spare parts, and they can't make the load line anymore. The day I took this, I went from my office to the Port Authority offices, and it's 3 modes, and all 3 modes crapped out that day. But the River Line, showed up, and of course, one train gets canceled. That's it. So now you wait another 20 minutes or. But that's the thought is that the URPA will operate it, and it will be more of sort of a PATCO efficiency rather than a contractor that's doing a River Line. But they have not decided on the cars yet. And the thought is that the diesel LRV technology is advanced since the River Line. That's 20 years now. But PATCO is leaning more toward an electrically powered vehicle. Now, it could be a battery at this point. But that was the River Line was the cost was the prohibitive thing to put up catenary and everything. And that was sort of like, if this succeeds, we'll put up catenary later. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I think PATCO and the ERPA are more attuned to having something not diesel and more traditional. But that line is under construction. That will go from basically where the waterfront terminal of the River Line now down at the aquarium in Camden, and follow another old PRSL line down to Rowan University in Glassboro. I forget the event I went to at the RPA a couple weeks ago. They were talking about an opening date. I thought they were saying like 2030, 2031 is what they're looking at.
But so they've actually started construction on this?
Yeah, there's active construction. And
okay,
part of it's they've got to work around Conrail, and that's not always easy.
I was just going to say, because when I was working at DOT, Conrail had objections to it in terms of the spacing of the tracks.
Yeah, and that's how you deal with the railroad. Usually, is you buy them off, so that they're being bought off with additional tracks and everything. But the railroad also objected to the overhead wire for the River Line, and that was So I don't know how that's going to get worked out, but well, again, part 2 will probably have a little more on that. But I don't know if we're going to have a whole lot of conclusive information because again, there's open questions still on technology and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, the URPA won't be the operator of that line in some way, shape, or form. So.
And what fare is it going to be integrated with? This is one of the problems with the fares is that, DRPA is a separate fare from SEPTA. Transit is a separate fare.
Yeah. You have, PATCO has the Freedom card right now, and there is a capability to use that on SEPTA, and they keep not doing that. Now, SEPTA's just recently allowed you to use credit cards, stored, they have stored value, but you can actually use your own credit card. And I think that's what's, that somewhere along the line are going to decide to merge all that and have inter-system fares. But it's not there yet, unfortunately. But there is a little known add a ride from PATCO to SEPTA. Again, not very many people know about it, but you can get a transfer, which gives you basically a round trip ride on SEPTA. But again, ask somebody about it. Even the PATCO people aren't really sure what it's all about. So.
Huh. Okay. Any other questions for Bob about the presentation? Oh, Paul has his hand up again.
And one last question. I appreciate it. The labor that operates PATCO, are they represented by the same union as SEPTA since they came from there, like with the original bridge line, or is there a separate collective bargaining unit?
No, it's a separate local. I forget.
It's the Teamsters. We were
It could be
Teamsters.
Teamsters. Yeah.
Ah,
I
okay.
was a member.
But that was they did draw from PTC and SEPTA early on, and PTC was actually going to run the line, and then because PTC had a strike, I think it was '66, and that left some. The thought was like we don't want PTC strike to affect this new operation, so PATCO decided again we're going to hire our own people, and PATCO's done funny things. Like I mentioned, like when they had the farebox operation, they hired Kelly temps to run the farebox because they didn't want to take on they didn't want to take on staff they couldn't keep. And then I heard a story from somebody once where they could have put the motormen that were about to come online in that capacity, and apparently the collective bargaining agreement said they couldn't collect fares, kind of thing. So one of those things, but there is it's a Teamsters union as I recall, and it's not TWU, it's not the SEPTA local or anything. PATCO has had a couple strikes that I recall. I don't remember the last one, but they don't stay out for very long. And it's from what I've been told, it's a pretty happy workforce. It's people that want to do the work, and that changes the paradigm quite a bit when you actually want to do that and serve the public.
Thank you.
Sure. But of course, we'll talk more about it in part two. The operator used to be out there right out in the open, and not anymore. The rail fan seat's gone. You've got a closed cab, so that didn't go over well with a lot of PATCO riders when that first came along. There was the thought that things are going to happen without that presence, but we'll talk more about that in part two.
Okay. Thank you, Bob, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Last chance for a question.
Thanks very much.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you again to our presenter. Especially thanks to those who made a donation during the registration process for tonight. If you'd like to support the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, you can always go to patrolley.org/support. Become a member, become a volunteer. We'd love to see you more. And then we will see you hopefully in August for our next presentation. And again, if you have a presentation that you'd like to share, please reach out to me. My email address is kfred@patrolley.org. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks again. Bye.